I need you to stop whatever you are doing right now. Stop scrolling. Stop eating. Stop breathing if you have to. Because what I am about to tell you is the single most embarrassing, most chaotic, most butterflies in your stomach catching on fire experience that has ever happened to a human being in the entire history of awkward situations. I got locked in a classroom. Alone. With my crush. For 45 minutes. No teacher. No friends. No escape route. Just me, her, 4 walls, 28 empty chairs, and a ceiling fan that would not stop making a weird clicking noise. And I want you to know that I did not handle it well. I did not handle it even a little bit well. This is that story. Okay, first let me tell you about Maya because you need to understand the full weight of this situation before we go any further. Maya has been in my class since 7th grade. She has this laugh that sounds like everything is genuinely funny to her, and not in a fake way but in a real way that makes you want to say funnier things just to hear it again. She remembers small details about things you said weeks ago and brings them up naturally in conversation like she was actually listening when you talked. She is the kind of person who makes a regular Tuesday feel like something worth remembering. I had been trying to find a normal way to talk to her for approximately 8 months. 8 months. I had drafted and deleted 17 different openers in my head. Not texts. Just imaginary conversations I rehearsed while staring at the ceiling at midnight. None of them ever got used. Until the universe decided to take matters into its own hands. It was a Friday afternoon in October. Last period of the day. Mr. Patterson's history class. The kind of Friday where the whole school is vibrating with end-of-week energy, and everyone is already mentally in the weekend before the bell even rings. Mr. Patterson had given us a free study period which everyone knows is just a polite way of saying talk quietly and pretend to look at your notes. I was sitting 2 rows away from Maya, which was my usual spot because I had strategically chosen that seat on the first day of school, and I want to be very clear that I am not proud of that, but I am also not going to pretend it did not happen. The bell rang and the classroom cleared out in about 11 seconds flat. You have never seen teenagers move so fast in your life. It was like someone yelled free pizza in the hallway. Backpacks flying. Chairs scraping. People halfway out the door before the bell even finished ringing. Mr. Patterson packed up and walked out telling us to have a good weekend. I was still putting my notebook away because the zipper on my bag had been broken for 3 weeks and I had to do this specific 2-handed maneuver to get it to close. Very important detail. Remember the zipper. Maya was still at her desk too, looking for something in her bag. I noticed, but I played it cool. By which I mean I looked directly at my broken zipper and silently panicked. I finally got my bag closed. I stood up. I walked to the door. I grabbed the handle. I pulled. Nothing. I pulled again. Still nothing. I rattled it a little. Completely locked. Not stuck. Not jammed. Locked. With a key. From the outside. I stood there for a moment just staring at the door handle like it was going to explain itself to me. Then I heard Maya's voice from behind me go, "Is it locked?" And I turned around and said with full confidence, No, it is fine, I just have to." And then I pulled the handle again as hard as I could and it did not move even slightly, and I finished my sentence with, "Yeah, it is completely locked." She stared at me. I stared at the door. The ceiling fan clicked. Okay, so the first 5 minutes of being locked in a classroom with your crush are a very specific kind of torture that I think should be studied by scientists. Neither of us said anything for what felt like a full year but was probably 45 seconds. I tried my phone. No signal. Of course no signal. The one room in the entire school built like a concrete bunker, and we are in it. Maya tried her phone. Also no signal. We looked at each other. We looked at the door. We looked at the window, which was one of those old ones that only opens 4 inches because of some safety regulation that was really working against us right now. I considered yelling out the 4-inch gap. I decided that was worse than just waiting. I sat back down at a desk. She sat back down at a desk. The ceiling fan clicked. This was fine. Everything was fine. Nothing was fine. Maya was the one who broke the silence first because she is a normal human being who can function under pressure, unlike me. She goes, "So. Locked in a classroom on a Friday. That is one way to start the weekend." And I laughed. Way too hard. Like a sound came out of me that I have never made before and hope to never make again. It was somewhere between a laugh and a hiccup and a seal, and I felt it leave my body and I could not take it back. She blinked. I cleared my throat. I said, "Yeah, totally, living the dream." Living the dream. That is what I said. To my crush. While locked in a room. I want you to know I thought about that phrase for the next 6 hours straight. But then something weird happened. She laughed at the living the dream thing. Not a pity laugh. A real one. And then she said, "Okay, but genuinely though, do you think anyone is going to notice we are missing?" And that started an actual conversation. Like a real one. She asked if I had seen some show everyone was talking about. I had not seen it, but I had heard enough about it to have an opinion, which turned out to be enough. She told me about this one episode, and the way she described it, she did the voices of the characters and did these little hand gestures, and I realized I was just fully watching her talk and smiling like an absolute fool, and I had to physically remind myself to respond with words. Then there was awkward moment number 1. We had been talking for maybe 15 minutes, and the conversation hit one of those natural pauses where both people stop at the same time. And in the silence I went to lean back in my chair casually, and I leaned too far. The chair tipped. I grabbed the desk. The desk was not bolted down. The desk slid. I went backwards in slow motion and caught myself with one hand on the floor in this genuinely bizarre position that was half fall and half accidental gymnastics move. I stayed on the floor for one full second before getting up. Maya had both hands over her mouth. Her eyes were huge. She said, "Oh my gosh, are you okay?" And I said, and I cannot explain why I said this, I said I meant to do that. She lost it. Full laughter. Head back. The good laugh. And I decided in that moment that almost falling on my face was the best thing that had ever happened to me. After the chair incident, something shifted. The weird stiff awkwardness kind of cracked open and we both just relaxed. She moved her desk a little closer so we could talk without projecting across the room like we were on a stage. We started talking about actual things. Not small talk things. Real things. She told me she had been stressed about her grade in chemistry, and I told her I was weirdly good at chemistry, which was true, and she seemed genuinely surprised by that. I do not know why people are always surprised when I know something useful, but I chose not to take it personally. She told me about her older sister who was going to college next year, and how weird the house was going to feel. I told her about my dog who had passed away earlier that year. And she got quiet in a kind way and said she was sorry, and it was one of those moments where someone actually means it, and you can tell. Then came awkward moment number 2. We were both kind of just sitting there in this comfortable quiet when my stomach growled. Not a little growl. Not a polite quiet growl. A full announcement. A sound that said I have not eaten since noon and I am making it everyone's problem. The noise was so loud it echoed slightly off the walls of the empty classroom. Maya turned to look at me with the most perfectly timed expression of shock I have ever seen on a human face. I put my hand on my stomach like that was going to do anything. I said, "That was the radiator." She looked around. There was no radiator in the room. She looked back at me. I nodded seriously. She covered her face with her notebook and laughed until her eyes watered. I decided the radiator story was going to be something I took to my grave. And then we had one of those conversations that you do not plan. The kind that just happens when you are stuck somewhere with no distractions and no exit and nothing to do but actually talk to another person. She asked me what I wanted to do after school. Not like a small talk question. Like she actually wanted to know. I told her I wanted to study architecture because I had always been obsessed with the way buildings told stories about the people who made them. And she went quiet for a second and said, "That is actually a really cool way to think about it." Nobody had ever said that to me before. Most people just said, "Oh cool," when I brought up architecture and then changed the subject. She asked me a follow-up question. I asked her about what she wanted and she lit up talking about marine biology and the way she described the ocean like it was this whole other world that most people walked past without stopping to look at. I thought about the fact that I had sat 2 rows away from this person for a year and had been too nervous to say more than 5 words, and now we were sitting in an empty classroom talking about oceans and buildings like it was the most natural thing in the world. We had been in there for about 40 minutes when we heard footsteps in the hallway. We both jumped up at the exact same time and ran to the door and started banging on it and yelling. I was yelling hey and she was yelling hello, and we were completely out of sync with each other, so it sounded like some kind of weird echo situation. The footsteps stopped. Then a voice on the other side goes, "Hello?" And I yell back, "Hello, yes, we are locked in here," at a volume that was way too loud for someone standing 3 feet away through a door. There was a long pause and then the voice said, "Mr. Patterson left the key at the front desk." 1 second. We heard them walking away. We looked at each other. I was out of breath from yelling at a door from 3 feet away. She was trying not to laugh. I was also trying not to laugh. We both failed. The janitor came back with the key and opened the door, and the hallway light came flooding in like we had been in there for days. He looked at us, looked around the empty classroom, and said, "How long you kids been in here?" I said 45 minutes. He shook his head slowly and said, "Nobody checked on you for 45 minutes? And I said, "No, sir." He shook his head again like this was a personal disappointment to him, and walked away muttering something. Maya grabbed her bag and we walked out into a hallway, and it felt genuinely strange to be back in the normal world with its noise, and its open doors and its signal bars on my phone. 4 texts came through at once. None of them were from anyone checking if I was alive. We walked toward the exit together, and right before we got to the main door she stopped and turned to me and said, "Okay, so that was genuinely the most random Friday I have ever had." And I said, "Same. Also, I am sorry about my stomach. It has no concept of timing." And she laughed again and said, "For what it is worth, the radiator excuse was pretty creative." And then she said, "We should study for chemistry together sometime. Since apparently you are secretly a chemistry genius." And I said, "I mean, I would not say genius." And she said I would. And then she walked toward her bus, and I stood at the door for probably 4 seconds longer than a normal person would before walking to my own bus and sitting down and staring out the window with this completely uncontrollable smile on my face that I could not get rid of for the rest of the evening. I got home and my mom immediately looked at me and said, "Why are you smiling like that?" And I said, "I am not smiling like anything." She stared at me. I went to my room. I lay on my bed looking at the ceiling and went through the entire 45 minutes in my head like a film I was rewinding and replaying. The chair fall. The radiator lie. The architecture conversation. The way she said I would when I said I was not a genius. I picked up my phone and I opened our school's messaging app and I typed out, "Hey, so about that chemistry studying." And then I stared at it for 10 minutes. And then I sent it. And then I put my phone face down on the bed and did not look at it for 6 minutes because I was not emotionally ready for whatever came next. My phone buzzed. I picked it up slowly. She had replied in 4 minutes, which I had read online was a good sign, but I was also aware that reading things like that online was not exactly my most dignified behavior. Her message said, "Finally?" I was wondering how long that was going to take you. I read it 3 times. "Finally." She said finally. Which meant she had been waiting. Which meant that the 8 months of imaginary ceiling conversations had been somehow visible in ways I had not intended but was currently extremely grateful for. I typed back, "In my defense, I was trapped in a room with you for 45 minutes, and I wanted to give you some space." She sent back a laughing emoji and then a time and a place for Saturday at the library. I put my phone down. I looked at the ceiling. And I thought, sometimes getting locked in a room is the best thing that can happen to you. So that is the story of the most accidentally perfect 45 minutes of my life. I got locked in a classroom, almost fell off a chair, lied about a radiator, had my stomach announce itself to the whole room, and somehow came out of it with a study date and the kind of conversation that you replay in your head for weeks. Here is what I actually learned from all of it. Sometimes the thing you have been overthinking for 8 months is a lot simpler on the other side of it. Sometimes all it takes is a broken door lock and a janitor who takes his time finding the key. And sometimes the universe just looks at all your carefully prepared openers and says, "Nope. I have a better plan. Trust me. Now go put your chair back properly so you do not fall off it." I am speaking from experience on that one. Subscribe for more stories where I embarrass myself so you do not have to. Skull loudly crying face.